N- The day my world collapsed started with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and I remember standing in the kitchen in my socks, half awake, reaching for my coffee mug when my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost didn't pick it up. I almost let it go to that pile of unread notifications I deal with later. But something made me stop. Something made my hand reach for it. Don't go to the cabin this weekend. Check the storage unit on Mercer Street first. Unit 14. You need to see what's inside before you make another decision about your marriage. No name. No context. Just those 3 sentences sitting there like a grenade someone had dropped through my window. I set down my coffee. I read it again. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and told myself it was spam. A wrong number. Some bizarre mistake. I told myself that for the next 4 days. My name is Claire, and I had been married to my husband for 6 years. We met when I was 24 at a friend's housewarming party in Portland. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately made you feel like the room had been waiting for him. Confident without being loud about it. Funny in that dry, quiet way that you only catch if you're paying attention. I was paying attention. We dated for 2 years, got engaged in the fall, and married the following spring. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding. We kept it small, just family and close friends, a little venue outside of town with string lights and wild flowers. My sister did my makeup. My best friend, Jess, stood beside me at the altar and cried harder than I did. For a while, things were good. Really good. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood. We adopted a dog, a ridiculous golden retriever mix named Biscuit who destroyed 2 pairs of shoes in his first week and somehow never got in trouble for it. We talked about having kids someday, not urgently, but in the comfortable way couples do when the future feels like something safe and bright. But then, slowly, things shifted. I don't know exactly when I first felt it, that particular kind of quiet that settles between 2 people when they've stopped really talking to each other. It crept in gradually, the way cold air comes under a door. My husband started working later. He joined a gym on the other side of town, which I thought was odd when there was one 6 minutes from our house, but he said he liked the equipment there better. He started taking weekend trips, work retreats he called them, with colleagues I'd never met and whose names changed slightly each time he mentioned them. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I told myself what a lot of people tell themselves when they're not ready to face something. I still remember the casual shrug. I still was demanding a testosterone. I said we were just going through a rough patch, the kind that passes if you're patient enough. I was very patient. And then came the cabin trip. Every year in late October, a group of us, me, my husband, Jess and her boyfriend at the time, and 2 other couples we'd known since our 20s, rented a cabin up near the river for a long weekend. It was a tradition. One of those things that had started casually and then calcified into something we all counted on. S'mores and bad horror movies and too much wine, and that particular kind of laughter that only happens when you've known people long enough to have history with them. My husband had suggested it this year. He'd been the one to book the cabin, which surprised me a little because he'd seemed distracted and distant for months. But I took it as a good sign. I told myself he was trying. The text came 4 days before we were supposed to leave. I spent those 4 days going back and forth in my head. I almost texted the number back a dozen times. I drafted replies and deleted them. I Googled the address. Mercer Street, a self-storage facility on the east side of town, one of those nondescript places with an orange and white sign and a keypad at the gate. I had no idea we had a storage unit there. As far as I knew, we didn't. On the 4th night, I couldn't sleep. My husband was lying next to me, already out, breathing steadily in the way that used to comfort me and now just made me feel more alone. I stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. I thought about the gym on the other side of town, the colleagues with shifting names, the way he'd started angling his phone away from me when he typed. I got up at 6 in the morning while he was still asleep and I drove to Mercer Street. The facility opened at 7. I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes watching the sky get lighter, my hands wrapped around a gas station coffee that had gone cold. I thought about leaving. I thought about turning the car around, going home, making breakfast, pretending I was the kind of person who could let things go. I wasn't that person. When the gate opened, I went to the front office and explained, carefully, keeping my voice steady, that my husband and I shared a storage unit here and I couldn't remember the unit number. The man behind the desk was older, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and he looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. He typed something into his computer. He told me the account was under my husband's name and that our unit was number 14. He gave me the access code without any hesitation because the account listed me as an authorized user. I hadn't known that either. Unit 14 was in the back row, away from the entrance, half hidden behind a corner. I remembered the sound the padlock made when I entered the code, a small, clean click that felt much louder than it should have. I rolled the door up. Inside, there was a folding table pushed against the right wall, and on top of it, neatly arranged, were things that didn't belong in any storage unit I'd ever seen. 2 large duffel bags, zipped. Beside them, a manila envelope, unsealed. A small lockbox with a key sitting right in the keyhole, and a leather portfolio, the kind people use for work documents, sitting open. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I walked in. The manila envelope first. Inside were 2 sets of printed documents. Lease agreements. One was for an apartment in Seattle, a 1-bedroom, signed 8 months ago. The monthly rent was listed, both signatures were on the lease. One was my husband's. The other was a name I recognized immediately. It was Jess, my best friend. My sister in every way that mattered. The woman who cried at my wedding. I had to read it twice, then a third time. I still were in that storage unit in the thin October morning light, and I read my best friend's name on a lease agreement with my husband's signature beside it, and I felt something happen inside me that I don't have a good word for. It wasn't just pain. It was more like a restructuring. Like the internal scaffolding I'd built my life on was quietly, methodically coming apart, and I was watching it happen from somewhere just outside my own body. I put the lease documents down and opened the lockbox. Inside was cash. Bundled, organized, a significant amount. I counted later. It was $40,000. $40,000 in cash, in a lockbox in a storage unit I didn't know existed. Next to a lease for an apartment where my husband apparently lived part-time with my best friend. I opened the portfolio last. It was full of printed emails. I don't know why he printed them. Maybe he'd been worried about digital records. Maybe it was just habit, but they were there, in order going back nearly 2 years. I didn't read all of them. I read enough. I read the ones where they talked about the cabin trip, not as a group getaway, but as an opportunity. They were planning to use the weekend to tell me. That was the phrase my husband used in one email. The weekend is when we tell her it's the right time. Everyone will be there, she'll have support, and we can have a clean break. He planned to end our marriage at the same cabin where our friends had watched us laugh and eat s'mores and be, from all appearances, a happy couple. In front of those same people. At a trip he had organized, I sat down on the concrete floor of that storage unit and I stayed there for a while. Here is what I've learned about moments like that one. They don't feel the way you'd expect. There's no screaming, no dramatic collapse. There's just a strange, terrible clarity. All the small things I'd explained away suddenly didn't need explaining anymore. They lined up and made a shape I could finally see. When I stood back up, I was different. I photographed everything. Every document, every email, every bundled stack of cash. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I locked the unit, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat with my phone in my hand. The first call I made was to my brother. He's 3 years older than me, steady in the way that some people just are, and when he picked up and heard my voice, or rather, heard the particular quality of silence before I could find words, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "Tell me where you are." I told him what I'd found. All of it. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished he was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I've thought about many times since. He said, "You're not going to that cabin." The next call I made was to a lawyer. I had a consultation that same afternoon because once I understood what was in front of me, I understood that the time for waiting was over. What I did not do was call my husband. I did not call Jess. I went home, I fed Biscuit, I sat at the kitchen table, and I thought carefully about the next 4 days. My husband came home that evening in a good mood. He talked about the drive up to the cabin, whether we should leave Friday morning or Thursday night to beat traffic. He was animated in a way he hadn't been in months, and I understood why now. He thought he knew how this weekend would end. He had a plan, and he believed he was in control of it. I agreed with everything he said. Thursday night sounded good. The cabin would be beautiful that time of year. I was looking forward to it. I was very calm. The next 2 days I moved carefully. My lawyer had walked me through the options. The cash in the storage unit, if it had come from joint accounts, was relevant to the divorce proceedings. My husband had, over a period of months, moved money in ways that would need to be examined. The Seattle apartment had been partially funded through a business account tied to a joint asset. There were financial angles to this that I couldn't afford to ignore. I also quietly contacted 2 people from our friend group, not to tell them everything but to make sure someone else knew what was happening before the weekend. I didn't want to be alone with my husband in a cabin in the woods with the knowledge I was carrying, without anyone else aware of it. On Thursday afternoon, 2 hours before we were supposed to leave, I told my husband I wasn't feeling well and suggested he head up ahead of me and I'd follow in the morning. He hesitated. I watched his expression move through several things. "You sure?" he said. "Everyone will be there tonight." "I know," I said. "I just need to rest. I'll be there by 10 tomorrow." He left at 4:30. I stood at the front window and watched his car back out of the driveway. I watched it until it disappeared around the corner. Then I called my brother and said, "Okay, now, what happened next?" I planned with my lawyer and my brother over the previous 48 hours. My brother had a friend, a locksmith, who met us at the storage unit that evening. With documentation from my lawyer confirming my status as an authorized user on the account, we accessed the unit. My lawyer had advised me on exactly what I could and could not take for the purposes of evidence preservation. The documents and the evidence of financial transfers were carefully handled. The lawyer filed emergency motions first thing Friday morning regarding the asset questions. By Friday evening, when my husband was sitting around a fire at a cabin 2 hours away waiting for a conversation that was never going to go the way he'd planned it, I had spoken to our bank, I had changed the locks on our house, and I had forwarded a very detailed email to every person who would be at that cabin. I kept it factual. No hysteria, no cruelty, just the documents, the lease, the emails he'd printed himself, a timeline. I've been told it was a very quiet evening at the cabin after that email arrived. My husband called me 47 times between Friday night and Saturday morning. I let every call go to voicemail. My brother stayed at the house with me, and we ordered pizza and watched a movie. And at some point in the evening, Biscuit fell asleep across both our laps and I cried. Not from devastation, but from something more complicated. The strange grief of losing something you'd already, without realizing it, been slowly grieving for a long time. Jess texted me once. Just one message, at 11:17 on Friday night. It said, "I'm so sorry, I know that means nothing." I never responded. I've never spoken to her since. The divorce took 7 months. The financial issues were resolved through the legal process in a way my lawyer described as favorable. My husband had in fact moved money through the business account in ways that were not legal, and that discovery changed the shape of the settlement considerably. The Seattle apartment lease was terminated. I kept the house. I kept Biscuit. I've thought a lot about the anonymous text. I never found out who sent it. My lawyer suggested it may have been someone connected to the Seattle apartment building. A neighbor, a building manager, someone who knew the situation and had their own reasons for wanting it exposed. I'll probably never know, but I've thought about that person, whoever they were, and I felt a kind of quiet gratitude that I can't fully express. They could have stayed out of it. They didn't have to pick up the phone, but they did, and that one message, 3 sentences from a stranger, changed the entire trajectory of what came next. I'm 31 now. I live in the same house, which feels different than it used to, but in ways I've mostly made peace with. My brother comes over for dinner more often than he used to. I have a therapist I talk to every other week. Biscuit has destroyed a 3rd pair of shoes and continues to face no consequences for it. There are things I'm still working through. Trust takes a long time to rebuild, not just in other people but in yourself. in your own perception. One of the things that stayed with me longest after all of this wasn't the anger, which was real but also finite, but the self-questioning. The wondering how I had missed it for so long, how I had explained it away so consistently. My therapist has told me that this is one of the most common responses to betrayal. Not rage, but a kind of bewildered interrogation of your own judgment. I've been gentle with myself about it. Slowly. There's a particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up all at once in some cinematic moment. It builds quietly in small decisions made under pressure, in the choice to act with your head when your heart is breaking, in the willingness to face a thing clearly even when everything in you wants to look away. I found that strength in a storage unit on a cold October morning, and I've been trying to hold on to it ever since. I'm not the person I was before all of this. I don't think I'd want to be. That person was patient in all the wrong ways and let the silence grow too long without asking what it meant. The person I am now listens more carefully. To other people, yes, but mostly to herself. If you're sitting somewhere right now with a feeling you keep explaining away, I want to say something to you directly. That feeling is information. You don't have to burn your life down based on a hunch, but you're allowed to look. You're allowed to ask the question and find out what the answer actually is. You owe yourself that much, even when it's frightening, especially when it's frightening. I drove to Mercer Street because I couldn't sleep, because 47 days of silence had finally become louder than I could ignore. It's the best decision I've ever made. Not because of what I found, but because I stopped pretending I hadn't already felt it. You already know what you know. The question is whether you're ready to let yourself know it.